Welcome, Agents of Chaos. I decided that this was the best place to start as far as corrupting the general population to my Asian horror shenanigans. I also want to clarify that first, before kind of starting this, that it's going to be a rare circumstance as far as this video goes. And I kind of feel like scripting this first and just kind of talking over what's already going to happen, because as you're watching this kind of start anyway, my reaction's not going to matter. Everybody knows what this movie is. I'm not going to pretend that there are some people in the world that absolutely have no clue what The Ring is. And it's just like, I can't skip it and then come back to it later. I mean, I don't have a lot to say about the movie in general. Even when this did come out, and it came out in 1998 in Japan. So if it came over here a year later, I think I would have been either in my first year of high school, my last year of middle school, something like that. It didn't really scare me like Ju-on did when it came out. But I really don't feel like that's a reason to neglect it as far as Asian horror goes. Like, it served its purpose. There are lots of things you're going to see that are probably interesting. So my feelings about it don't really matter as far as what it contributed. So we're going to kind of keep going with that anyway. Like, in 1998, it did change a lot for the horror genre. If not immediately, like, Sadako right now is really popular in Japan. Like, you see her everywhere. She's referenced everywhere in every type of, like, normal cultural media anymore, because it just had that big of an impact, so you can't really get away from it. And it got a lot of people in the US, mostly, I think, into Asian horror movies, so that was great to see more stuff coming out. But Ringu plays more like a detective movie than an actual horror story, which might be kind of some of the reason why it's kind of a little laggy. It's also based off a book series from 1991. And if you weren't alive for the 90s as far as technology goes and the advancement of computers and phones, there's not really much of a difference between 1991 and 1999. It's not like you're going to have several drops for phones every year. Cell phones are still pretty rare. I don't think at that point in time you're looking at Wi-Fi being prominent either. A lot of stuff is going to be corded. So there's that to kind of take into consideration as far as going into this movie and if it's going to feel dated to you, because it absolutely will if you're not from the generation that ever saw a blank tape. As for the main plot, and it kind of can go a couple of different ways just depending on who you ask, but the way I really look at it is it's kind of what tradition versus like what modern culture is doing and modern advancement and this, that, and the other thing as far as the plot. And it really kind of is focused on the tape itself, and all of the questions come from how can this exist? Like, what's going on with it to begin with? So it kind of has that going for it too. And before jumping into the plot, I mean, there are going to be spoilers, because if you haven't watched this for whatever reason, I don't really know what to say, because like I said right at the beginning, I really feel like everybody's seen this movie, so there can't really be that much room for spoilers unless you're just very new and you never thought to look up some of the references. And I mean, spoilers for the American version too, because they're not exactly the same, and they handle stuff pretty different. And I thought about kind of addressing Ring and Ringu that way. The way that they made it for the American audience, I think parts worked better, But I think the story worked a lot better in the Japanese version if you're patient enough to kind of wait it out. But it is long. It feels very long. It is not a long movie, but it feels like a little marathon. So, if you haven't watched this, you want to watch it first. It is actually free streaming on Tubi with the rest of the sequels. And there's a correct order and there's not a correct order, according to some people, to watch these. But you can feel free to start with Ringu, because that is the first one. The next one would be Spiral or Raizen, whichever you're going to call it, Japanese or English. But they both came out the same year. So it's hard to argue that Ringu 2 is the second when there is one that came out the same year. And I thought about covering that nonsense too, as far as these going together, but I haven't read the book. I didn't buy the book. I kind of looked up, maybe thinking about buying the book, but it doesn't seem like it's very available. And again, that's coming from 1991 when it was released in Japan. And yeah, there are American books out there somewhere, but with how hard it was to get me a copy of Parasite Eve, I really don't know that this is going to be something I'm just going to walk in and find somewhere. It's going to take a little bit of digging. If you've read the books and you recommend the books, I have a vague idea of how the plot works and how it is weird like the sequels, and nothing really seems incredibly linear at a given point, but yeah, just let me know in the comments if I should pursue that too, if it brings any clarity to anything that I might have missed, so I'd like it a little bit better. But going back into this and its sequels, you could literally watch either one as the sequel. They both kind of pick up from the same part. Ringu 2 is more of a direct sequel, so it will probably be a lot less confusing, but you can always watch them in order too. It's just like you're getting a bad ending and a good ending in a video game, really. There are a couple of times where I'm going to compare it to video games, so it kind of makes sense. But the setup for Ringu is very long, and the payoff at the end, you kind of assume the worst, but it could kind of go either way. It's not clear what's going to happen next, but you know it's set up for a sequel. And I guess you can do with that what you want to, as far as spoilers go. So, I mean, I'm pretty sure the American version does the same thing, where it kind of has enough that you know that there's going to be a sequel, but you don't know really which way it's going to go. That being said, the main difference from the American counterpart is pretty much Ryuji. And in the American version, the son is kind of the psychic. You don't really have anything from her friend character that she's going around with and trying to get all these clues. They kind of just come from just premonitions, or they come from drawings from her son. But in the Japanese version, Ryuji is a psychic. He ultimately is some sort of psychic. He has some sort of connection to some type of powers that make him more sensitive to whatever shenanigans Sadako is sending his way, for whatever's happening plot-wise, where they're kind of stuck. He can kind of push forward because he knows how to think, and he knows kind of where to go, which you don't really have it the same way in the American version. It's more free moving with all those hints that are given, and he just kind of fixes it with riddles and things that you'll kind of see on here. So Ryuji's kind of a teacher too, so there's him and his assistant Line. She comes back for some of the other things too. guess most of Ryuji's spiritual connection, I would say, is more connected to Sadako's mother. And it kind of triggers it both ways because he can kind of look into the past with different trigger key objects. Towards the end of the movie, like when he touches people, he gets more information, so that kind of helps them figure out what the heck is going on. But it's also clear that their child has these types of powers too, and there are a couple of times where it feels like Sadako might be pushing him towards working some things out, or kind of pushing him to do things that he shouldn't be doing, like watching the tape. And other stuff happens in the other movies, so I mean, I'm gonna cover them too in time, and I'm gonna get more critical in detail like I am with these other movies when they come out. But I figured just for starting off, it's just, this one doesn't need any type of bells and whistles. It's not gonna be too interesting to hear any take on. Go ahead. Your main character in this movie is Rika, who is the reporter. She has all these connections. There are a couple of different times where Ryuji is going to tell her to kind of figure out who this person is so he can have their number to kind of go look into things and work with them instead of her, so she can just kind of stay with her kid if she's apparently gonna die. And I mean, they just kind of work well together, which is probably why they hooked up at some point. It just seems like he's pretty focused on what he wants to do, and she's pretty focused on what she wants to do, so it doesn't seem like there's anything else that's weird with them. And I know a lot of that's different in the books, because I've seen a bunch of people talk about that specifically, that his character is very different in the movie than it is in the book. He's more sympathetic, which, I mean, it's not really a bad thing as far as, like, the hour and a half you're watching it. Just kind of having a protagonist that kind of leads you along without kind of doing all this massive research like they do in the American version. He just kind of knows where to get the information. He knows what to look for. He kind of figures out, like, where little quirks and things would be too, so that kind of helps out a lot too. Going back to the theme I mentioned earlier, traditionally Japanese religion is very nature focused, it's very duality focused, and being in balance is very important. And I think that comes across really well in this movie, which is why I said it's like traditional means of anything, making this tape, having a curse, and then being modernized as in the tape. And the tape kind of going into it, like, it can be broadcast, it can be recorded, it can be passed around, you can leave it somewhere. As long as somebody watches it, they're also cursed. So it's like a different way of doing that instead of having that duality. It's a little bit more menacing. It's harder to break because it's like a chain letter. But it just kind of feels like it really relates to Shinto religion and all that sort of stuff together. And if you want another gaming example of this, you can look up Fatal Frame 5. I think it's kind of the perfect example, especially with the connection to water. And I didn't really connect that until I started writing this, so it actually is the Maiden of the Black Water. I think it only came out for the Switch, and what was before that? The Wii U? Yeah. Whatever the other one is. It didn't really, I don't think it really did well because it was kind of capped at that for the longest time, but I think they did eventually bring it out for all the consoles because it's stupid not to have that game on the platforms that it was made for. The PlayStation. Thank you. Bring them all to the PlayStation. Remake 2. I don't care about the other ones. But getting back to Fatal Frame 5 and how it actually relates to this, and I'm not on a tangent like a crazy person. Basically, the plot of that is you have these people in this religion, because there's so many different things that you can do depending on what shrine you have, what you're practicing, whatnot, that they kind of take the anger, they take the sadness, they take away your pain, they listen to everything that you're doing, and it seems like whatever type of ritual that would have gone into making some type of curse like this, it got distorted somehow because it wasn't created the correct way. And since Sadako, we're not talking about that American version right now. Bad. Since Sadako had all that time to suffer in that well, she just kind of made a twisted image of what that would be, as far as either broadcasting this to be put on a tape or getting it somehow on there through manipulating somebody else that had psychic powers. Like, we don't really know the beginning part of this unless it's in the book and I'm mistaken, which I could be. But the way that they do the ritual in there is you're locked up in a box, and whoever that priestess is that's suffering too much and has all this weight on her soul, I guess, from taking in all these other bad energies, goes into this box, and they just float her down wherever into the water. The water cleanses, the water heals everything, and then they make that sacrifice for you. And it kind of feels a little bit like going into that. It's like kind of the same idea, only not really, because I mean, she wasn't a willing participant in there. She got thrown in this well. Like, she was not looking forward to being murdered. But it's like how that mountain kind of has that crisis in Fatal Frame 5 too, when you don't have that sealed portion, and then all this weird stuff happens, all this darkness starts falling out, everything starts to fall apart around there, and it's very much the same thing. Like, she'll mention somewhere along the lines in this movie that she only got the phone call because she was in that cabin, which was right above the well. So it makes sense that they would get that call there. I mean, she's not going anywhere. She's just kind of projecting that energy upwards, and it's going in there, and then they're being notified that they're kind of screwed. So, like, it makes sense in that sort of way. But in that kind of direction, I guess it's not really Sadako that's cursing them so much as who threw her in the well, which was her father. So that's kind of an interesting take, I guess. That's about all I got for it, though. As far as that goes, it's the only thing that I could really think of that made a lot of connection to it. If you play that game, it's a good game. All Fatal Frame games are really good. They are very dark Shinto games for the most part. But yeah, I think 5 really kind of hits it on the head there as far as what I'm trying to say. Like, even if you watch the trailer, it kind of fits. There's a little bit of room there. There's room for it to fit better, but I mean, it's not a perfect one-to-one anyway. It's just kind of saying something that's a little bit more modern and kind of relating it back to it. But basically what's happening at that point is the tape, and when you're passing this off and when you're copying it, that's becoming the vessel in that box that's spreading the malice, spreading the betrayal that she felt after what happened. So it's just shifting whatever she's feeling onto something else. So it's not really her that's the creation of all this either. It's spreading like the curse that it is. So I guess that's pretty much all I had. Let me know if you've seen the movie, or I guess if you want to look into it now that you've heard my mad ramblings like a crazy person over the top of what you're seeing here. I mean, if you did see it, let me know if you thought it was scary too. And like, I guess maybe like how old you are. I think it may have just been a thing. Like if you were a 90s kid or if you were alive in the 90s, it would be more scary than if you just never had to deal with it. And the technology is pretty dated, so it could just seem like a lot of relics, I guess. So maybe it's just like I'm on the border of that and it just wasn't that interesting. I don't know. I remember when 2004, 2005, right before I went to Japan, I talked to a lot of Japanese exchange students at school about what they thought about it, if Sadako was scary to them. And I mean, the general consensus is she is pretty scary. Like she has that hair over her face. You're not quite sure like if she's human or not, which I think they bring up in that film. When you do see the close up of her, she's got some like gray scaly skin. She's been in a well, so it's kind of hard to tell if it's a mutation of some sort or if she is actually not human and she's just something sent from the sea, because her mom could apparently talk to the sea in different sea languages. So, I mean, there's a lot of weird stuff into it. Maybe the book would explain it a little bit better. But I'm not going to just go and read a post online about the book. I just want to read the book for myself and kind of have my own opinion about